Well, hey everybody, welcome to the GoDaddy Pro Wednesday WordPress social community meetup. My name is Adam Warner. I work for GoDaddy Pro. I'm a longtime WordPress user. I would call myself an implementer, not a developer or designer, but we are lucky today because we do have a developer in our midst, and his name is Topher DeRosia. He is a senior WordPress architect at Camber Creative. He brings more than 25 years experience as a web developer. I think I'm missing something. As a web developer, over a decade of which has been spent building out WordPress sites. In addition, Topher curates HeroPress.com. And fun fact, Topher is responsible for making the official International Space Station Windows 95 desktop theme. That is a claim to fame if ever there was one. He currently lives in Grand Rapids, Michigan, 30 minutes away from my hometown, by the way, with his wife Kate and two daughters, Emma and Sophia. You can find Topher on Twitter at Topher1Kenobi. That's Topher1 Kenobe on Twitter, talking about e-commerce, web development, general technology, and culture. He's also a regular on the Make WordPress and Post Status Slack channels. And the title of today's meetup is Innovation in WordPress Outside of Gutenberg. So, Topher, welcome to our meetup. Thank you so much for joining us. And can we start by asking you a simple question? What do you mean by the title, Innovation in WordPress Outside of Gutenberg? What does that mean?
Well, Gutenberg has gotten a lot of attention in the last couple of years. It has dramatically changed the way WordPress works, and it just tends to get a lot of focus. And people forget that there are other things happening in WordPress outside of Gutenberg, things that are really impressive and really move the product forward. And I'd like to talk about some of them today. I've got 4, but we may get into a few more. I'm going to start off talking about multilingual WordPress translations. Translating WordPress has been around almost as long as WordPress, and it has been done poorly the entire time. WordPress is not well structured for multilingual, and some other notable CMSs like Drupal and Joomla have done a pretty good job of it. And they look at us and think, wow, how did WordPress get so big without having this really important part? As a developer, I've worked with a number of plugins, WPML, Polylang, Weglot, and they each do it a little bit differently. Most of them tend to leverage meta fields. And if you're not a developer, you may not know that meta queries are really slow. And so when you get a heavily translated site that really leverages a lot of meta queries, it gets really slow really fast. And that's not good for anybody. So I was really excited to hear in Matt's State of the Word for 2020 that coming up is going to be a strong emphasis on getting better translations in WordPress, multilingual sites and things like that. It's really exciting. I, as well as probably every other WordPress developer, have given great thought to how it could be done, it should be done. There's been a ton of discussions, thousands of talks standing around a table at a WordCamp, of people discussing, how would you do it? What would we do? So I'm really curious to see where it goes. If you're at all interested in this, by all means, get involved. Now's the time. Nobody has really started on it yet. This is just something that Matt announced. So if you're interested, it's really easy to get in the front door and have an opinion and work on multilingual. Even if you're not a developer, just say, this is what I want. This is how I would want to translate a page. I'm looking at a page of my language, whatever that be, and I want to make it another language. How do you want to do that? Do you want to click a button? Do you want to have a form right on the main page? Do you want to whatever?
Now, I have a question for you. I have a non-developer translation question for you. When
All
we're
right.
talking about WordPress translation, are we talking about the admin side of things? Are we talking about the front end side of things? Are we talking about both? Are we talking about translating query strings into other languages? Because I know
Yeah.
with the use of, PO files or
Profiles. Yep.
profiles,
Yep.
that translates the admin. So what are we talking about here when we talk about WordPress translation in the big picture?
The things we're talking about right now are multilingual websites with content in multiple languages.
Okay.
The translation of the app itself, structurally, programmatically, is pretty solid with profiles. Obviously, not all of the strings are there because not everybody's translated every language, but the structure for doing the admin area, as well as key elements of the front end, are there. So like widget titles, like for the built-in widgets, and all the stuff that's built in basically is easy to translate. Okay. Translating content is another story altogether.
So what we're talking about is if I'm building a site that I know has a global audience, well, every site can have a global audience, but let's say my target audience happens to be in one part of the world and another part of the world and another part of the world. Let's say I have 3 target audiences that are global, all in different languages. I need a way as a website admin or developer designer to offer my client that ability to have that existing content that's in one language automatically translated easily for the users. Now, when that's translated, you mentioned a slew of plugins or a handful of translation plugins. Is that something that can be automatically presented to the user? So if they identify an IP is from one area, can that translated language automatically be presented, or is it a point and click? I've seen years ago when I worked with WordPress multi-site, we had an English. It was for a ventilation system company, and we had customers in North America, but also in Canada, but also in French Canadian customers. There were 3 different translations, and I think it was WPML at the time. And you get a little flag that you can click on, which then translates. So are these translation plugins or are the options only available where you have to manually have a copywriter put in that content in another language, or are we talking about automatic translation?
It could be both. Do you remember the old game of taking a block of text and putting it into Google Translate into another language and then back into English to see what you get? Yeah. So that's where we are with artificial intelligence right now.
Okay.
So, now, I will say that today it is infinitely better than it was when Google Translate was invented. And it will continue to get better. And probably at some point, you will be able to read an AI translated page without laughing out loud. But forever and always, the king of the hill will be manual translation by a human who understands the nuances of the language and can tell the difference between 2 words that are spelled the same but mean different things. Okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So if someone were you started to go down the path, if you want to get involved in helping this translation project, where would one go for that? Would that be the Polyglots team on make.wordpress.org? Would you contact the plugin developers specifically? What's your advice?
I don't think there's a team assembled yet for Matt's new initiative. Hanging out with the Polyglots people would be a good first place because they're going to be deeply involved, I'm sure. Getting on Make WordPress Slack and attend the core meetings. They're once a week. They're not that long. And I don't want this to sound bad. They're not tedious even if you're not a developer. You know what I mean?
No, explain. What do you mean?
Some people think, well, I'm not going to go to a core a core development meeting because I'm not a developer and I'm not going to understand anything they say.
Right. That would be my hesitation. Right.
Yeah, that's not the case. They don't speak in PHP and JavaScript. They speak in English, and they talk about issues and they talk about things they're going to build, and they make decisions. And so you can attend a core meeting without being a developer, and feel like you're in the right place.
Got it. Okay.
So I would get both in the core channel and the polyglots channel, and maybe just lurk, watch the Make WordPress blog. I'm sure that'll be the first place that anything important is announced. And if you've never contributed before, this is a great new place. This is going to be a new thing. And if you haven't been happy with any of your options before, here's a brand new one.
Excellent. Good advice. I just put the link to make.wordpress.org in there. You can find all of the contribution teams. And as Topher said, since this is a relatively new initiative, then I'm sure there will be updates there, as you said. Just want to remind everybody, first of all, thanks again for joining us today. And there is, under the chat, there is the general chat, as I see many of you are taking advantage of. There's also the Q&A. So if a question pops up, it doesn't have to necessarily be related exactly to what we're talking about. Feel free to put some questions in there, and then we'll get to those during the Q&A session. All right, so Topher, we've talked a bit about translation. Do you have more to add there, or do you want to talk about? Okay, please.
The next. Oh no, I'm sorry, not for translations. I have a new topic.
Okay, so innovation in WordPress outside of Gutenberg. We know translation in WordPress is one. What's number two?
I'm going to talk about the rise of APIs.
Ooh, that sounds like a good movie title.
Yeah, it does. APIs have been around for a really long time, and they've been getting steadily more important. And it's not a big rush, but we're getting to a kind of a critical point, I think. And you've probably used an API or two without realizing it. If you've ever used Akismet for anti-spam in WordPress, that uses an API. WordPress. Okay, so an API is called Application Programming Interface, and it's basically a way for two computers to talk to each other securely without giving away the keys to the kingdom, like passwords and things like that. So an example would be if you need to edit some content in a database, but you should not have the password to that database. Somebody would build an API, an interface, a tool that lets you fiddle with only the things that you should fiddle with. So, for example, with Akismet, you should not be logging into Akismet and pasting in emails and things like that. It shouldn't be done. So they made an interface where you can send some code to a specific address. It does its magic inside its black box, and it spits out a result. Maybe this is spam, maybe this isn't spam. And WordPress changed a great deal when it started having its own API. So you can, the API is turned on for every WordPress site, basically.
I remember there were some pretty heated discussions about whether that should be on or off by default.
Yep. So I can write a program which accesses your blog over its API and download all of its content and re-render it on my own blog. But this is something else that allows the WordPress mobile app to work. That's why you can have a mobile app for WordPress. So when you log in on your phone, it's talking to your site over the API. When you make a blog post, it's doing it over the API. It's not using the PHP that is your WordPress blog. And so I want to talk about a variety of things that are coming via API. Many of you know that I have worked for BigCommerce. I'm still actually the BigCommerce brand advocate. And they leveraged the they leveraged the BigCommerce API heavily to bring e-commerce into WordPress. So
via a plugin that BigCommerce has for WordPress. Okay.
Yep. There's a WordPress plugin that you put in your credentials, and it connects to the BigCommerce API and logs you in and says, "Oh, you have products. Let's download those into WordPress." And whoosh, all your products are in WordPress.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there on, it's very much like WooCommerce. You just browse your products. They're a custom post type. It's normal WordPressy stuff. Until you get to the end when it's time to check out, and there's an embedded iframe. And so when you buy, it's transmitting your secure stuff over SSL to the BigCommerce servers rather than routing it through your web server. So none of the sensitive data is ever on your web server.
Mm.
And what this does is, I had a really good talk with Morten Ren Hendrickson about this a couple of years ago at WordCamp Europe. He's of the opinion that no e-commerce should ever be done on WordPress because it's too easy to make a mistake. WordPress has made it so easy for people who don't know what they're doing to get in over their heads and get in a lot of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And his opinion is that for things like e-commerce and many other things like it, there should be a company that is dedicated to doing nothing else. And so in this case, it's BigCommerce. BigCommerce does e-commerce. That's it. There's nothing else. That's all they do. They're very good at it. All of their attention is applied to security and maintenance and all that stuff. And so this allows you to use WordPress to sell things, but rely on a third party, a company that knows exactly what they're doing to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So another example could be there's a great API for, I lost my Eventbrite.
Eventbrite. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a wonderful API for Eventbrite. You could replicate Eventbrite in WordPress using their API. And it'd be a lot of manual labor, but the API is solid and well documented. It wouldn't be that difficult. And then you would have a robust event system maintained by someone else, maintained by Eventbrite.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, but I do have a question. I guess it's a question, not a comment, about APIs. So backing up to when you're talking about BigCommerce being the thing that powers the e-commerce portion, pulling that information in via a BigCommerce WordPress plugin and populating your WordPress site, which allows you to do all the fun marketing, content marketing, and social stuff that you would need to do as an e-commerce store owner. When you make a change onto something that's been pulled in, does that API also allow it to go back and edit or populate your BigCommerce store? And just in general, is it a consistent thing that APIs allow two-way conversation, or does it really depend on what that developer of that API allows or doesn't allow?
It's very much what they allow or don't allow. In the case of BigCommerce, it's one way, but two-way is definitely an option. So right now, if you pull in your product and you want to change it, you have to go back to BigCommerce and change it and pull again.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about having it be able to push back, and it will probably do that at some point. But another example is there are a zillion weather APIs on the internet where you just craft your URL and you send it off and you get back weather for Grand Rapids. You will never be able to push data back to them. They don't want your data.
Right. They don't want you changing the weather forecast.
Yeah. Now, but here's another cool thing. WeatherUnderground.com, WUnderground.com, has been around for many, many years. And I think for a long time they did. I don't know if they still do. They would allow you to take weather data from your own weather station on your roof, a kit you bought on science.com, and upload it to your account, and they would list it on your city. So right now, if you go to Grand Rapids, Michigan, at the bottom is probably 35 little lines of people's science kits on their roof with the weather. And so there's a guy in my neighborhood, like three doors down, and he's got a thermometer and a little windonometer, and that's it. It does wind speed and temperature. But it tells me the temperature outside at my house other than at the airport.
Yeah, yeah.
You know
Oh,
what I
that's
mean?
interesting. You can get hyper
So
localized that way.
yeah,
Yeah, I like it.
so that's something APIs can do.
Okay. Yeah. And another
Um,
example of API that I just thought of, I've got this little side hustle. I'm trying to teach our kids e-commerce and
oh yeah,
entrepreneurship. And I think maybe you may have heard about this, but I'm starting a t-shirt store for the kids for their drawings and
okay,
things. Mostly as an experiment to teach them, and who knows, we might make a sale or two. But looking at the different print-on-demand providers, so Printful and Printify, and those they provide WordPress plugins, and then I assume that it's the same process where that
exactly.
plugin is using their APIs in order for us to populate our site, and then the order gets submitted back to them,
Yep,
and then fulfilled. So, yeah,
that is exactly
APIs
what it does. Yeah.
APIs run the
So
world.
I see this becoming a bigger and bigger thing in WordPress. Um, One of the reasons BigCommerce did a WordPress plugin is that all SaaS e-commerce, so Shopify, BigCommerce, all of them have terrible blogging systems, and so
Mm-hmm.
content marketing stinks.
Mm-hmm.
And it's impressive to me that 100% of them have terrible blogging systems. It seems like somebody would stand out.
Well, yeah,
So we got questions all the time. Can I install WordPress on BigCommerce? And the answer
right,
is no.
yeah,
And but now we can say you can put BigCommerce in WordPress and leverage the content marketing of WordPress, and that's the magic of WordPress is content marketing, content, everything content.
yeah.
And so you take any API that is boring raw data, weather API, sports API,
Mm-hmm.
anything, and you can pull that into WordPress and build a beautiful, magical website with it. And I think WordPress is going to become foundational to a lot of other APIs.
Now, in some of Matt's recent Matt Mullenweg, we're talking about, if you're not familiar, who is the co-founder of the WordPress software, along with Mike Little. I don't know if it was his I don't think it was his last State of the Word, maybe a year or two ago, talking about the API-driven WordPress and talking about headless
Mm-hmm.
WordPress and that it's here now that WordPress will essentially can be and is in some ways, but can become an engine that powers basically anything via
Yes.
the API. So, can we talk a little bit about headless WordPress and what that means? And I assume that's
Sure.
the same thing we're talking about here, APIs, and what are the
Yeah.
benefits?
Yeah. It leverages the WordPress API that's built into it. We talked a little bit about that already with the mobile thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But so, say for example, basically what you're doing, it's called a REST API,
Mm-hmm.
which means you're just sending a URL with the right parameters, and it returns to you raw data, either in a JSON format or XML or a variety of formats, something a computer can read.
Mm-hmm.
And so, say you
Text
are
file
writing
of
an
sorts,
app.
right?
What's that?
A text
What's that?
file.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So you write a little script in JavaScript. jQuery has a fetcher. I think raw JavaScript does now. In 4 or 5 lines, you can send a request to a URL and get back data. So say you're requesting everything about post ID number 247, and it's a blog post about your vacation last summer.
Mm-hmm.
It will come back with the title, the content, the categories, the picture, all the stuff that's related to a post. And then you're holding it there in your JavaScript, and you can print it any way you want. Print it into your web page.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not running WordPress right here. You're running a little bit of JavaScript, but WordPress is powering that data. It's sending it out. Now, a lot of people have formalized this. There's Gatsby, there's Static. There are a number of static WordPress generators that are just that's what headless is.
Okay. And just for people who may not know, when we talk about static generators, you're talking about creating a site, powered by WordPress, but then do you export it into like static HTML?
Yeah.
And then so you get the benefit of instant page loads and
Right.
super speedy
It's
stuff
as
because
if
it doesn't have to
somebody
make
typed it out.
database calls, correct?
Yeah, it's as if somebody typed it out by hand in a plain text file, and there's no database involved. There's no heavy lifting involved, and it makes sites very, very fast.
Yeah.
You lose the power of a database for like forms and things like that, but we're much stronger these days with JavaScript to be able to deal with that sort of thing.
Here's a silly question for you from a non-developer. With the rise in static site generators and the use of the WordPress API for using WordPress as a headless software, what happens when I need a form on a static site? So I use a static site generator and I need to have a form submission. How does that work if there's no database call? What gives?
So this kind of harkens back to the early days. I've been a web developer since the days when we had to figure this out. When you make a form, in the form action tag is a URL, and that's where it sends the data to do something.
Mm-hmm.
If your site cannot do that, if you're not running PHP or Perl or anything else, it has to go offsite. So there are services. There are many form services out there where it looks like Gravity Forms. You build a form, and it gives you a little bit of JavaScript that prints the form in your site, or maybe the raw form HTML. But when you submit, it goes to their server.
Okay.
Does its magic and comes back. Kind of similar to Jetpack comments.
Mm-hmm.
If you use Jetpack comments, it's when you fill out that form, it's leaving your site and going over to the Jetpack, and then coming back.
Yeah.
And it might do it via an iframe. It might do it via Ajax. Who knows? There's a variety of ways. But once you get your server to the point where it can't process data because it's just a static site server, then you have to process that data somewhere else. Okay,
so then you're dependent upon some kind of form service for the non-developer in order to embed that form into that static site.
Yes. Now, something sort of tangential but quite interesting, I think. Stratic is a hosting company that offers static WordPress sites, and they manage all the work. So you just sign up with like a regular host. You get into WordPress, you do your thing, you hit save, and it outputs a static site for you. Okay. They've done a bunch of work with Gravity Forms to make Gravity Forms work. Okay. And the way they did it is they became that service that we talked about.
Okay. So that's even another revenue stream or another.
Exactly.
Okay. And for those not familiar with Stratic, that is a company, I believe, founded by Miriam Schwab. And I am going to go ahead and put the link there. We really need to have a third person putting links in the chat here as we talk about that. We need to put BigCommerce in there as well. Okay, so that's really interesting. And I just want to share a quick story. I know we're down at the bottom of the hour here. I want to make sure we have time for the other two items on your innovation list. And one is several years ago, and you and I shared this. I shared the story with you earlier. A company that I co-founded, we created a screen capture Chrome extension, right? There's millions of those.
Right, yes.
But the difference with this one was that you could capture one or multiple images and then upload them directly to your media library on any connected WordPress site that you happen to connect within your account here. And the benefit was you could it would pull in programmatically the title of the image, or you could manually enter things, and it would pull in that metadata. So when that image was in your media library, it came with all of the stuff that you need, the alt text, etc. But in order to make that work, this was before WordPress had the APIs built in. We had to use the Jetpack plugin on any of those connected sites, and we had to turn on one specific module. And I don't remember the exact name, but it was basically a module that enabled
it was the API.
The API. So I wonder.
The API module.
I guess looking back, that was probably an MVP
absolutely
test for WordPress core. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you brought that back, it would do much better, I think. It'd be a lot easier to build.
We'll see. I've had a couple of recent conversations, so we'll see how that goes.
I'm interested in it.
I know I could use it.
Yeah.
So, okay, good. Well, hey, so you said there was 4 things in your innovation outside of Gutenberg in WordPress. We've covered 2, translation in WordPress, API-driven content and services. What's number 3?
Number 3 is mobile apps, and it's very similar to the API stuff. And we've talked about it a little bit. There's an existing mobile app for WordPress for both Android and iOS, and it leverages the built-in API that is in WordPress. But something happened very recently that is going to change things quite a bit, I think. When the REST API came out, people sort of expected mobile apps to explode, and there would be dozens of mobile apps for WordPress. But there's one uncomfortable bit. It was very difficult to log in to WordPress and keep things organized well. And in WordPress 5.6, which just came out recently, they enabled per app authentication. And so as an example of this, I don't know if you've ever installed a plugin for Twitter or Instagram or Facebook where they say, in order for this to work, you must authenticate with Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. You put in your stuff. And then in those apps, you can log in and say, these are my connected things. I've got these websites connected, and I don't recognize that one from China. They must have hacked me. Exactly. So now that's enabled. So people, so say you would make an app, any app that needs to connect to WordPress. People can authenticate with it, and it will make them do that same thing basically within your WordPress site. And then they will be able to log into your site and say, these are the apps that I have connected to this website. Now, theoretically, it's just you. I mean, it's your website. I doubt you're going to be offering access to everybody in the world to your website. But that's something you would watch for. You would have this page that say, these are the apps connected to my website. And it's this mobile app made by Automatic. It's this other one made by Topher, and it's, some guy from China. Maybe I got hacked.
Now, there probably is a use case for allowing other people to connect to your site. Let's assume your site is the hub for content that you want other people to send via a mobile app and then have displayed on that site. Would that not be a way? And then for the person managing that WordPress site, is it built in that you would be able to see all of those connections, or is there a page in the admin side where you would be able to, or would they have to be added as a user in order to authenticate? How does that work?
I've only seen screenshots, and they were in a blog post on make.wordpress.org about this topic, and it showed me a list of connected apps.
And were they different apps, or was it the same apps with different users connected? I wonder.
You're asking me questions I don't have answers.
No, that's okay. That's all right. I'm known for pushing the envelope with my lack of knowledge.
I will find that blog post and post it in here at some point. But the reason I brought this up about innovation is that I think this is the key that's going to make it much more interesting for people to make weird little mobile apps for WordPress that do very specific things. You and I talked about an Instagram-like app where it's not tied to a social network like Instagram where you share with your friends. It just posts to your blog. And in theory, you could do that now with the WordPress app. There's just ton more steps because it's not made for that specifically. It's made for blogging.
Mm-hmm.
So you can make an app where you take a picture, put in a title and description and category, and hit go, and it makes a post on your site. And now you have a photo blog. It can be very, very fast to go from taking a picture to having it on your blog.
Or on the flip side of that, it could, like we were talking before with this Chrome extension that my team had, you could walk around with your phone, take video or photos, and automatically upload that directly to your media library for later use. So let's say I'm an artist and I'm going to make a blog post. Well, let's say I'm a chef and I want to make a blog post about the recipe that I just did. I can just sit there and take pictures along the way, group all those together, send them so they're already in my media library, so I can avoid that step of having to send photos to my computer and do all that. Of course, they come in not unedited, but you can do all that on your phone or your iPad too. I see the use case there.
Another great example, several years ago, maybe more than that, maybe 5 or 6 years ago now, somebody came out with a WordPress theme that was intended for live event blogging. So your homepage was a regular blog, but they expected posts of only 1 or 2 sentences and to have them come in very frequently. So it auto-updated every few minutes.
I remember that.
And so you're like at a concert or a political event or something, and you're filling out your blog as quickly as you can, and it's doing it. Now, at the time, there wasn't a mobile app. There wasn't an API. You had your laptop, and you were typing into the regular old WordPress admin, which sort of works like if you're at a table at a political event. But if you're standing in the rain at a political event where people are screaming and throwing rocks, you probably don't want to be on your laptop. You want to be huddled behind a rock typing on your phone.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the API would facilitate that, and you could output dozens of posts in a very short period of time. So this would facilitate that sort of blog very well. That's
another great use case, Topher. I hadn't even thought about that. And I think that what you were referring to was WP Candy back in the day. Ryan someone, I can't remember his last name. Shared a hotel room with him one time at WordCamp Phoenix back in 2012. But I remember he did quite a few live blogs of WordCamps and things. So I wonder if it was, maybe he didn't create the theme, or maybe he had it created, or was just using the theme. But that's a great use case. I would. It sounds to me like you and I are coming up with some pretty good list of MVPs. So let's get to it. So anything else about mobile apps that you want to mention?
No, I'm going to move on because I want to get into GraphQL and then still have time for questions.
Okay, yeah. And again, just a reminder, everybody, feel free to use the chat tab, slide over to the Q&A, and start typing some questions in there, or, comments, maybe questions on, what ifs, maybe nothing specific about this, or share your API based, mobile app based product idea, and we'll discuss. So so Topher, innovation in WordPress outside of Gutenberg. We've covered translation in WordPress, API driven content and services, mobile apps. What's number 4?
GraphQL.
GraphQL. I just want to preface this by saying, I've been in this space. I've been to hundreds of events. I'm deeply ingrained in the WordPress community. GraphQL all over the place the last couple of years. No idea what it is. No idea
what it is. Are you familiar with SQL?
Of course, yeah. My first junior web programming job I got because I was given an SQL book, a SQL book, and said, learn this and you'll have a quiz on Monday.
Nice.
So tell me more.
So the QL is query language.
Okay.
In both SQL and GraphQL.
Okay, so graph query language. Got it.
So GraphQL is a different query language. It does the exact same thing as SQL. It has a slightly different syntax. The results are like it's written for a different environment. Okay. But the idea is you communicate with this query language to the server what you want, and it gets back to you the data you asked for.
Okay.
Now, the reason this is significant is that it's replacing old-fashioned REST API stuff. I mentioned earlier, a REST API is just a URL, basically, where you put in some parameters and you get back some stuff on the web. The issue is that there's not much standardization at all.
With REST API?
Yeah, with the REST.
Formats? Okay.
And so when you make a REST API, you have to document it heavily to tell people, here's what you can ask for, here's how you ask for it, here's the format you're going to get it back in. If you don't like that format, too bad. All that stuff. GraphQL standardizes a ton of stuff. Mm. So if you say, here's my website, and I have GraphQL enabled on it, especially with WordPress, there's a great GraphQL plugin. It's in 1.0. It's 100% perfect now. Of course, perfect. It's finalized, stable.
Okay.
Once you learn the query language for WordPress, you can query every WordPress site the same way, and get back the data in a standard format that other apps are going to understand. So there are consumers of the output of GraphQL. So you do your request, you get back your data. What format is it in? Sort of like how RSS is a standard. You know, how many apps can read RSS?
Right.
All of them, because it's a standardized output. And we're getting there with GraphQL. And REST really didn't have that. We've been talking about mobile apps for WordPress and using the REST API and things like that. If you have GraphQL installed on your WordPress site and your mobile app can deal with that, it's going to be much, much less code to accomplish what you want.
Because things are standardized.
Exactly.
And you know exactly what you can get and what you can't get and what format it's going to be in.
Right.
Now, forgive me again for this possibly pending lack of knowledge.
I will always forgive you.
The WordPress API, the API that's built into WordPress core, are you saying that API isn't as standardized as GraphQL, or are we talking about other query languages not being as standardized?
It is. The WordPress REST API is standardized within WordPress.
Within WordPress, okay.
So if you know how to use it with my WordPress site, you know how to use it with every WordPress site. Mm-hmm. But that knowledge will not help you at all working on a Drupal API. Mm-hmm. Whereas if GraphQL is installed on a WordPress site and a Drupal site, you can probably run the same query and get what you want.
Okay, so a couple of follow-up questions. One is a comment. So GraphQL is bigger than WordPress.
Much.
Okay. And GraphQL, how do you install GraphQL? Is that something you install at the server level? How does that work?
I believe it's just a plugin. Let me Google here real quick.
Okay. So it would be likely be a plugin for WordPress, but then for Drupal, it would be a module in Drupal.
Sure.
Perhaps it's something you can install and activate just like a plugin.
Yep.
And another, who is the founder of GraphQL and is there a foundation?
Oh boy.
What is you don't have to answer specifically, but what is the ecosystem of GraphQL? I assume it's bigger than one person. I think Jason Ball is pretty into that or had something to do with that.
Yep. So it looks like the initial release for GraphQL was 2015.
Oh, 2015. Okay.
Yeah. I've been hearing people talk about it for a couple of years outside of WordPress. If you go to, I lost my URL, wpgraphql.com. Mm-hmm. There is an excellent page about how to install it for WordPress. It is just a plugin.
Thanks, Chuck. GraphQL.org and WPGraphQL.com. Nice.
Yep.
Okay.
So stepping back a little bit, I hear all the time, if you're into WordPress, if you're a developer, you should experiment outside WordPress just to keep up with the rest of the world. And this is a great example. GraphQL is much, much bigger than WordPress. And if you're learning of GraphQL through WordPress, if you learn GraphQL because you're messing with WordPress, it's going to stand you in good stead elsewhere as well. So you get a job somewhere else, not doing WordPress, and you say, "Hey, I know GraphQL." They're like, "You're our guy."
Always good to diversify your development skills with something more ubiquitous than a single platform.
Yes.
Okay. All right. That makes sense to me.
So all four of these things are to a certain extent related. The translation material I talked about, WPML has done the best job with using an API to do translation work. So you can hire that company that I mentioned the name of earlier, Aclaro. You pay Aclaro a certain amount, and they connect to via API to your site.
How do you spell Aclaro?
ACCLARO.
Okay.
So you take an English page and you click a button, say, Aclaro, translate this. And it sends off a thing to their API. One of their translators does their magic. They hit a button and it sucks it back into your WordPress site. And it's done. It's a professional human being. They do not have access to your site. It's just very smooth. I was very impressed. Mobile apps, they're all going to be functioning over the APIs. GraphQL is a language you would use with the APIs. Everything is becoming interconnected via APIs, and I think that's a huge story that isn't really happening.
Yeah,
you don't hear too much about.
Is that what Zapier is based on? With all its connections, everything that it connects to or allows you to connect it to that's all API based. Is it
all
not?
API based? Yep. Okay. And that's their real magic, is they have stabilized code to communicate with all the APIs, so that you can take the weird output from one and feed it into the custom input for another and get different output from the third. That's wow, so much work. I can't even.
Yeah, I'm just
imagine.
I'm just thinking here. Doesn't that also present some dangers in that you invest in a certain API? And I speak from experience here with the plugin business I had, where we were supporting sharing, so Facebook, Twitter, all that, and then things change. Their APIs change and your product breaks. Is there a inherent danger in using APIs in general? Well, or is it good that some APIs might just never change?
There is always a danger. The most danger is using public APIs, basing your income on public APIs. If you write something for fun to pull down baseball data and put it on your website, and they change their API, your site breaks. Wah. If you build a professional sports site and you're taking advertisement and you're making $1 million a month, and your free API goes away, that's just dumb. And so
I would imagine that would be an issue.
So if you're going to build something at that scale, you want to pay for the API. And at that point, you have contracts, and if they don't tell you ahead of time, you can sue them. All that stuff. So
you got legal protections that way with service level agreements and things.
Yep. So the dangers are in that if you're using a free API, it might go away. If you're not depending on it for money, too bad. I don't know if you know Robert DeVore.
I am familiar with Robert. Yeah.
So he has a theme built called WP Dispensary. It works for selling marijuana-related stuff.
Sure.
And he started accessing an API called Lead Maps. which lets you show.
Sorry, go ahead.
You see his tweets?
I saw it recent. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So Weed Maps allows you, or has data about where marijuana-related stores are around America. And so he started using it. He built it into his theme, and you could look up if there were stores near you and all of that. And one day they decided, you know what, we're going to monetize this, and just turned it off, which was absolutely within their rights. There was a free service they were offering, and they decided not to offer it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But that messed him up.
Was this a paid theme, a premium theme, or a premium?
Yeah,
premium plugin that allowed. Okay, all right. So
well, you know what? You're right. It was a plugin he offered for his theme.
Okay, so that's an issue.
Yeah. So yeah, that can absolutely happen, and you need to think about that. If you're making money from an API, you need to be paying for that API, so that they can't jerk it out from under you.
Yeah,
things like that.
Yeah, it seems logical. I mean, it seems only fair if someone's providing you with data that's helping you to earn an income or create a product. It seems fair enough to pay for that, or run the risk of what you've just described. Things getting turned off and you being left in a lurch, and not to mention your users as well.
Yep.
Okay. So where does that leave us? We've got innovation in WordPress outside of Gutenberg. I know I keep repeating that, but this is my host voice. So we've covered translation in WordPress. Please, folks, put your questions in the Q&A. We've got about 8 minutes left. Anything you want to talk about? Translation in WordPress, API-driven content and services, mobile apps, GraphQL, and basically the ubiquitous nature of how all of these things fit together. And it seems to me, Topher, that all of this is centered around APIs. Like this is all these four things, all these innovations that are happening. If you had to bucket it into one thing, it would be APIs, not just WordPress API, but APIs in general. Do you see that as the continued future of the web? That it's just going to be a whole bunch of connectors, and then people will build what they will build?
Yes, to a certain extent. I believe it will become more and more popular, and then one day AWS will go down and all of your content providers will go down and your site will be empty, and the cry will go up, own your content. and there will be a backlash, and people will stop using APIs all of a sudden.
The cycle.
And do their own thing. Yes, and they'll do their own thing for a while, and then realize how much easier it would be to have somebody else do it, and go back to it, and it'll balance out. There will always be the people who do their own thing and don't want anything external.
Right.
And there will always be the people who say, you know, I never host anything myself. I use everybody else's content.
Yeah.
It's like I have a drive full of MP3s, and I listen to my music off my drive with an MP3 player. And I know people who don't own any MP3s at all. Everything's on Spotify. Because they don't want a drive full of music that they have to think about. Yeah. And that's the difference in people who are going to have their own content as opposed to API users. Yeah.
I like that analogy, and that's something I think about a lot. I'm a bit of a family archivist, and so I've got boxes full of VHS tapes, mini DVs, old 8mm reels, and with digital files, I've got music on records, cassettes, still some CDs, MP3s. So everything is kind of scattered all over the place. And wouldn't it be nice to have one source of truth for everything? But I just don't think it's possible, right? It's you just have to.
Well, I mean, places like Google and Apple would want you to put your media into their service.
True.
Which is wonderful until they decide to take it down. Like Google's never done that before.
Yeah, and it's a difference between digital photos and a box full of physical photographs too. Like, I go through a box of photos and I get sidetracked and I'm there for 6 hours, reminiscing. But then I think, 6 years ago, we had a really funny moment with the kids, and let me dig out the hard drive that's on,
Yeah.
and try and find it. I feel like that's it's not exactly a great thing, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it pans out. We do have one question here. We got 5 minutes left. This is from Maya. So Maya says, I'm contributing to translation of strings of a number of plugins, but we always have difficulty choosing the translated word. And there's not a single article in that manner in the translated language. Sometimes I feel the translation doesn't make sense. Yeah, I think... do you want to speak to that, Topher? I think that's kind of what you had mentioned earlier.
She's probably better to speak to it than I am.
Yeah, I think that's just the problem with translations that you mentioned earlier, is that one word can be spelled the same way and mean two very separate things depending on how it's used, who translated it, whether a machine did or a person did, and for that matter, if that person if that's their native language, second language, and then how they interpret the usage, right?
Yeah. When I always speak English, but I've delved a lot into polyglots, and when I was early into it, I was naively thinking that if you speak the language, you speak the language. But there's a big difference between an American who speaks Spanish and somebody who grew up in Guadalajara.
Sure.
And even that within countries, and within types, business Spanish is very different from street Spanish. And if you are writing a business website in Spanish, you don't want your grandma who grew up in Guadalajara to do it, because she doesn't know business.
Well, yeah, I mean? Same thing with the different regions of countries. Like, so when I first moved to Florida from Michigan, people immediately started telling me I had an accent. And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? And I would use different words to mean the same things as different words that they were using down here. So it's the way of the world. It's the human experience, I suppose. We all have our little intricacies of our language.
I do have my translator badge from WordPress.
Oh.
I have translated part of WordPress core. When I worked for AC Digital Downloads, I was writing the docs on how to translate. And so I needed screenshots of it actually in action. And I didn't want to rely on somebody else. So I just went ahead and did it. And I translated part of EDD and part of core into Canadian.
Nice.
And so... that's all it takes. It's an on or off switch. If your name is in the list of contributed strings, then you get the badge.
Well, there you go.
So I am a translator.
So if anyone here is interested in helping to translate, you can go to make.wordpress.org, look for the Polyglots group, and stay in tune there to learn about all things translation. Topher, do you have any parting messages, advice, anything for our audience here?
I wanted to say one more thing about the polyglots. If you speak a language other than English, polyglots is probably the easiest way to contribute back to WordPress. Because you go to a web page with a form, and it says, here's the word in English, tell us what it should be in your language.
Simple as typing it out.
Just typing it out. The difficulty is in figuring out the right word. There's no technological difficulty. So you don't have to be a computer person. You don't have to know anything about WordPress. You just go to the forum, you figure out the words, and you put it in. Probably the easiest way to contribute if you speak another language.
That's good advice. And just like we used to tell people about WordPress, if you can write in WordPerfect or Microsoft Word,
boy, are you dating yourself?
I know, WordPerfect. You can use WordPress. So, hey, Topher, thanks so much for sharing your knowledge. It's always a pleasure to see you and talk to you. And for everyone joining in here today, I hope you really enjoyed today's session and got some good knowledge out of it. And we invite you to join us every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern for our WordPress social community meetups, where we have wonderful and knowledgeable people like Topher on. And also, if you're in the EMEA region and you'd rather attend a meetup in your own time zone, we have meetups on Monday in the EMEA time zone, and I'll just have to look at the time, see if I can find it really quick. It happens, well, I don't have it. So, hey, just check out proevents.godaddy.com to learn more, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Topher, thanks so much. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me. Had a good time.
You bet. Bye, everybody.
Bye.